5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to the GHT Overland podcast.
I grew up on a farm in a small town on the east coast.
And I'm from Newcastle, which is a couple of hours north of Sydney. Nice town on the beach.
And that's where we met.
This week is the start of us asking you and the overlanding community as a whole to pause.
Pause for a moment to give your strongest thoughts of support, thoughts of safety, prayers, whatever it is you do. Our friends Jolie and Mark of The Way Overland need you.
They need all of us. They need every thought, every prayer, all of our positive energy working in their favor. We received the most disturbing message last Thursday night from a reporter in Australia. She had several questions regarding Mark and Jolie's travel experience. How prepared were they? Is this something expected by overland travelers? And did we know Mark and Jolie had been in prison in Iran for the last 10 weeks? At first it was so extreme, there was a flash of disbelievement, followed by, we better double check this.
So with an immediate Google search on Jolie and Mark, then a quick check of their social media accounts, quickly we discovered this was no joke. Not even close. It was serious and it was scary. Are you kidding? In prison? In Iran? How? Why?
What kind of prison? I don't know why. These are just the things that flooded my thoughts. As reality set in, questions and fear for their safety overcame us.
My thoughts jumped to another podcast I remembered from a few months back. If you want a first-person account of what being in a prison in a country like Iran can be like, how fast and screwed up it can go, listen to Mike Rutland's podcast, Mic Drop. Go to the Chris Osman episode part 2. You'll hear just how horrific things can go. This is no exaggeration.
Is this the same daily reality for Jolie and Mark? We have no idea, and we hope not. We have no first-hand knowledge or experience with the Evin prison in Iran. All we know is what you can read on Wikipedia, potentially nightmare, hellish conditions. On the other hand, we've read that foreigners like Jolie and Mark might be treated much better.
So there's no way to know, and we have no desire to strike fear into anyone. While at the same time, we're not naive, neither are we patient for their release. Our only hope today is to spread awareness and to ask for positivity, prayers, and thoughts of peace and safety for Jolie and Mark.
Prayers along with strong positive thoughts for their safe release to their families.
If you're not into praying, totally cool. Please do whatever it is that resonates with you. We need to do whatever it takes to let their families know they're not alone.
Jolie and Mark have us, the overlanding community.
We did get in contact with a gentleman in Iran that Jolie and Mark stayed with. He had very nice, positive things to say about them, which was no surprise. He also told us he had no more information on what happened and that we see on the news exactly what he sees.
Today is Tuesday, September 17th, 2019. Just before recording this, we read that Mark and Jolie were officially charged today by Iran of spying over some drone video or pictures. No other details have been released or documented.
Of course, there's been a lot of speculations and assumptions being thrown around, which is the typical thing that unfortunately happens. There's one thing we know for sure. News reports without the people directly involved telling the story are so rarely accurate that it's all speculation.
so we are not tackling those details here. We don't know what happened, and frankly neither does anybody else but Mark, Jolie, and whomever else was there. It could have been as simple as being searched, the Iranian officials seeing they had a drone or obviously a lot of camera equipment, and they are arrested or detained for being spies.
What else we know is that Jolie and Mark are not spies, not even close. They're absolutely good people with warm hearts who are documenting their travels, much like any tourist and much like any blogger or YouTube creator.
It has been well established that Jolie and Mark have been willing to help and answer questions from other overlanders and travelers they don't even know.
In our case, two strangers running some podcast in Washington State, literally halfway around the world. They gave us unlimited time to ask our barrage of questions and ran through 2 SIM cards to do it at the crack of dawn. You never heard the 3 minutes of silence as Mark had to reload their SIM card to keep talking to us. All they said was, "No worries," as most Australians are known for saying.
So please, avoid speculation.
Ignore the jackwagons, throwing asinine suggestions around. I've looked. Most of them have no friends and no post of their own. They're just those kind of people. I'm sure they'd be singing a different tune if it was their own son or daughter or friend or loved one.
Our energy and our focus is 100% on Jolie and Mark.
We are going to replay a few segments of their interview back in December. If you would kindly spend this time thinking about them, we know there's power in numbers, and the Overland community is just that. The power of positive energy Jolie and Mark need.
Please pass this along for more awareness, more people being aware of their situation and their absolute desperate need for as much positive thoughts, energy, prayers,
or all of it, whatever it is that you feel good about doing. Their situation could not be more dire. It is our hope that they, along with their fellow Australian prisoner who has been there for 1 year and sentenced to 10 years, are immediately released safely back to each other and back to their families. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. And thank you for passing this along.
Jolie and Mark, our hearts ache for both of you. With love and support, we cannot wait to see that you've been safely released. Jolie are on a 3-year overlanding trip from Australia to London. They packed up their troop carrier after a 12-month build-out in July of 2017. Documenting their trip with a vlog on YouTube, after receiving an email from a listener about these 2 overlanders, we knew this would be an episode everyone would enjoy. So thank you, Chris Tiedemann.
Yeah, and without further ado, welcome to the podcast, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hello.
So why don't you go ahead and fill us in on any gaps in that intro and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Sure. Well, I'm 32 and Jolie's 26. We're both, well, prior to leaving, we're both in the construction industry in Australia. I'm a builder and
I'm a building designer.
Jolie's a building designer. We originally are from the east coast of Australia, but we were living in Perth for 3 years prior to leaving, just for work reasons. I grew up on a farm in a small town on the east coast.
And I'm from Newcastle, which is a couple of hours north of Sydney. Nice town on the beach.
And that's where we met.
That sounds really nice. So tell us, where are we reaching you today?
We're currently in Kathmandu in Nepal.
What inspired Overland Adventure for you guys?
Well, I was actually quite fortunate from a rather young age. My family, I was fortunate enough to have parents who were into traveling and traveling by vehicle, and we traveled a lot when I was younger, and that also included a 12-month journey around Australia. So from a young age, I was aware that overlanding was possible, and then I also traveled abroad quite significantly, and also drove from New York to Panama with 6 of my friends. We just bought cars there and completed that journey. So when I last came back from living abroad, I was kind of looking for the next kind of trip to do. So there was this route or the Africa leg, and seeing that we both hadn't spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, and due to the diversity of cultures we would potentially reach on this trip, this one kind of took preference over the Africa one, which not to say that won't happen at a later date, but that was kind of the driving force behind completing this one. When Jolie and I got together, we kind of bonded over mutual mindsets, and I could probably comfortably say this probably isn't something she would have ever thought of doing prior to us meeting, but fortunately when I first mentioned this as something I wanted to do, like, she was completely on board. So it's
been a bit of a learning curve for me, as it's just completely different from anything I've ever done before, but yeah, I love it. It's a fantastic way to travel.
Now, you guys started off in Australia. Where did you ship your vehicle when you packed it up and left Australia?
So we drove the car from Perth to Darwin via Uluru in the centre, and then we shipped a car from Darwin to Dili in Timor-Leste, which it's a very short distance, so it's only 2 days at sea. So really close, but in comparison for price-wise for shipping, it's almost as expensive as shipping it back from the UK to Australia.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, there's
it's a monopoly.
There's only one or two companies, I think, that do that leg as opposed to the more international routes. So, they definitely have a monopoly on it, and unfortunately, and if that's the route you want to go, you don't really have much option.
And that's the price you're going to pay. Any recommendations that you've got in packing up a vehicle in a shipping container and shipping it off to another country?
It's out. It's out. That leg that we did was very short. You can almost throw a stone from Darwin to Timor. And it's not very rough. I imagine for us shipping it didn't require a great amount of planning. We had to strip everything off the roof to fit it in the container, which is not something that we wanted to do because the roof rack on our roof is very difficult to get off. So fortunately, we were able to pack everything off the roof, bar the roof rack, into the car, and we deflated the tyres to just the back ones to around between 5 and 10 psi. And that managed to get into the container with about 10 mil to spare.
Squeezed in there.
Yeah, very close. But thankfully, once you get in, you can inflate the tyres a bit more. But yeah, look, we haven't shipped on a major international route which goes over bad seas, but I can't imagine it would be very different to what we did, which is, constant making sure that the cars in the container strapped down well, and your belongings are secure inside. Just on the shipping though, we also shipped from Borneo to mainland Malaysia. That wasn't in a container, that was on a Roro and a roll-on roller ferry, and that was a different experience and completely contrasting to our Darwin to Dili one, whereas that we drop off at the port and they drive it onto the boat, and which obviously has some inherent risk with theft, and it is renowned for people stealing, the people at the port stealing from your car. So we had to build petitions inside of the car to stop people being able to get into the back of the car, which is not something you want to have to think about. You honestly, like, you're leaving your whole house with these people and you expect them to have some respect. But even the shipping agent said, don't leave anything in your car, even to the extent of like anything in the front, including floor mats, your dash mats, your radios, or anything. So it's a known problem, and I would definitely recommend anybody looking to do that sort of railroad journey in the future to go to that extent of securing your belongings.
So all of those pieces that you had to collect, where did you put them?
The petitioning or
all the things that you had to remove from the vehicle, do you have to like pack that up in a bag and then take it with you to meet up with the vehicle?
We had the Tetris theme song playing and managed to squeeze everything into the back of the car. You could not move in here.
No, even to the extent where some of them were, like my long surfboard was protruding into the front, so Jolie couldn't really sit in the front of the car properly. But yeah, we managed to squeeze everything from the outside into the back of the car. Thankfully, there's a lot of space in these cars. And then we just took belongings with us that were really important, like our computers, cameras, and hard drives and the like.
Okay.
So your troop carrier becomes a third party in your group here. Have you given it a name?
Yeah, it's a bit of a silly name. It's kind of like Snoop Dogg, but Troop Dog.
That's awesome. That's great.
Embarrassing.
Everybody has a name for their... I'd say, well, probably 90% of people have got a name for their vehicle.
Yeah.
And they're always really fun to learn what those are.
Yeah.
Any specific recovery gear that you've got on the vehicle that you would recommend that our listeners should either have with them or definitely consider having with them?
We've kind of got 3 items which we have used, and I would probably recommend the places that we go, these would be a minimum requirement, and that's the winch, or some form of winch. We have a mounted winch, and the max tracks or something similar, and a shovel. They're quite simple, but we have used those. We've used the max tracks and the shovel a lot just to get us out, and we've used the winch only to get other people out. But it's just peace of mind. On all my 4-wheel drives, I've always had winches, and it's good to know if you're traveling solo that you've got a means to potentially get you out. The max tracks have been super handy, just getting us out of sand bogs, and the shovel as well. So as a minimum requirement, I'd say at least those ones. So you could also go down the path of making sure you get your snatch straps and your high lift jacks and the like. But as a minimum, those 3, I'd say.
Okay, and on the max tracks, do you have 1 set or 2 sets?
We've only got 2, and we had considered getting 4 prior to leaving. But so far, the 2 has been sufficient to get us out of anything that we've been stuck in. 4 would have potentially made those situations a little bit easier, but the 2's suffice for now.
What is the one thing you value the most, either on or in your vehicle?
I think one of the main things is the fact that we had the roof conversion done. So when we want to, we have a living space inside, and we're able to stand up comfortably. So if it's really bad weather outside, like when we're in Indonesia for their monsoon season and it's just torrential rain, we could escape it comfortably, and the cabin fever wasn't as bad as what it would have been if we hadn't have had it done. So yeah, it's
so only a little bit of cabin fever.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, sitting inside for 5 days obviously takes its toll.
Yeah, I bet it does. I've always wondered about that, and doing just a rooftop temp kind of setup.
Yeah.
And if it's really cold and yucky like it usually is in the Pacific Northwest where we are, I'm not sure that I could handle a week or 2 straight.
Yeah, that was the driving kind of motivation behind going to that extra extent and having the roof conversion done. it's obviously not a necessity for doing these long distance trips. I know a lot of people travel with just rooftop tents, but we had the opportunity to do it, and we obviously just wanted to be comfortable. So we're prepared to make that additional financial input it and build it so we had that space to escape to. And yeah, it's definitely something we really
yeah, I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, it's one of the better parts of the build, easily.
Do you feel that gives you a lot more, I want to say square footage, but just space? And if you need to get something, you don't have to get out of the tent and then go down to the vehicle. Everything is just right there.
Oh, definitely.
Mm. Yeah. And even because if we need some space, one of us can go up into the bed and the other one can hang out downstairs, down the bottom. Yeah, it's such a good living space with such a small space.
Yeah, that's right. We've also got, like, where we are sitting at the moment is in the bottom of the car, and this is the lounge area, which also turns into another bed. So there is essentially two beds which can be occupied at once. It is quite cozy in the bottom bed. We only use this under, let's say, extreme circumstances. Say if the wind is very strong, and I think we've only done that twice. Due to wind, we will have to pull the roof down and sleep in this area. And it's just, we have flexibility. And I imagine in a rooftop tent in those same situations, it would be quite difficult to sleep as well. So yeah, we've got another option, which is good.
Anything you originally packed that you never used or removed from your overall setup?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. We had a camp table. Well, we still have it. And I think we've maybe used it 3 times. So we're contemplating actually getting rid of it. And in Australia, we also had a camp oven. And we used that a couple of times, though they're not as practical when we're overseas because, like, in Asia, like, trying to source the timber to have a fire, and then it creates lots of smoke, and
it draws a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So, with the table, we have a table mounted on our rear door, and we also have the table inside and the areas to cook, multiple areas to cook. So we haven't really had a need to set an additional table up outside. We usually prepare the food and then sit down and just hold it and eat it. So it's a bit of a funny one. Our chairs that we have too are quite low, so the table that we have is a little bit higher. So obviously I've always carried tables previously to this trip, but it's just something we haven't really used.
Yeah. The
camp oven we used in Australia, as Jolie mentioned, but it's setting a fire up and cooking on the fire is something we did in Australia, but not so much in Asia. So we did get rid of the camp oven just to save space, really.
Did you end up using that table a lot more when you started, and then you just kind of got used to not having all that extra table space, or have you just really not used it much since you guys left? Well,
when we left, it was actually, we left in winter, so we were predominantly kind of sitting inside to start off with.
Okay.
So we weren't using it. We did start using it once it warmed up, and we were sitting outside more and around Central Australia and to the north. But we kind of realised that it's actually in our rear bag on our rear wheels, and getting it out and setting it up it's not a labour-intensive project, but it does take time, and we don't really need it, so we don't do it. So we've just stopped using it, really. But
yeah, makes sense. Okay. So what are your current top 2 or 3 destinations, along with a little detail on what made them so special for you?
I think for me, and I think also Mark, the number one was probably the Australian outback. I hadn't spent any time there before, but Mark had when he was younger, when he went around Australia. Just the remoteness and how clean everything is. It was just amazing. And the landscapes are just so diverse as well. And I suppose I didn't really truly appreciate it until we left Australia and we're in Asia, where although it's still very beautiful, it's extremely busy. So I had this great appreciation for the Australian outback. and how pure it is. And then the second, which was, I think maybe just after we left Australia, while we were waiting for the car to arrive in Timor, we went out to an island just north of the city called Atauro Island. And you have to get a $4 ferry out there and then hike about 5 hours to this little hut on the beach where there's no phone signal, no electricity, and there was amazing diving just 70 metres off the beach. So we sort of just...
It was a good place to wait for the car.
Yeah, it was just beautiful.
It sounds like it. What was the name of the island again?
It's Atauro. It's Atauro.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds like a good place to wait for a car.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And any other destinations that stand out to you, Mark?
We've just recently passed through northeast India, and potentially a bit naive of myself of what to expect from India. I usually associated India with the kind of scenes you see from Varanasi with the Ganges and the truckloads of people and quite busy. And what we've experienced so far from once we've crossed through Myanmar into Thailand is the complete contrast. Amazing landscapes and topography, deep valleys, huge mountain ranges, blue rivers. And it's just been mind-blowing, some of the scenery in northeast India. People are really friendly.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's been a great start to India. I think that potentially might change a little bit as we go further west, but yeah, I was just not expecting it at all. So that's definitely up on the list of the top places so far.
Okay, very good.
Tell us about your kitchen setup and anything you would change about it.
So the current kitchen setup is inside the car, but we have 2 petrol cookers. So there's a double one and then also a single one, which is really handy just for like if you just want to boil some water or something because it's so compact. So we take them outside to cook. And yeah, I don't think there's really much that we change. Maybe the cooker would be more easily accessible from the back, but yeah, I don't think we'd really change anything. We have quite a big fridge as well, which we haven't really utilised as much since we left Australia, which we had just completely full the whole time when we were there.
Yeah, the food in Australia is, in comparison to Asia, is obviously quite expensive. So, and travelling in the outback too, you need to take food to last you a longer period of time because you're away from civilization. So we have an 80-litre angle, a 40-litre fridge, 40-litre freezer, which when in Australia, that was completely full the whole time, the fridge and the freezer. Since leaving Australia, due to the proximity to people continually and the availability of food, we're only running the 40-litre fridge at the moment. We use the other side as a kind of a cold store, which is good because it gives us that extra space. But if we weren't doing the Australian leg of it, we could probably get away with a smaller fridge. But having that there is obviously good for us. Yeah, but apart from that, there's nothing really I think we'd change. We've kind of got everything. As Jolie mentioned, having the availability to access the cookers from the back may be something we could look at, but what we've got now definitely works for us.
And what was the name of the cooker?
They're Coleman dual fuel cookers.
Yeah. So we've got the bigger one, which is the green. It's probably about 1.5 feet by a foot, say. That has the dual burners in it. And then we've got a single one, which is, it's quite small, a single burner. And that we bought that, as Jolie mentioned, just to boil water. So we didn't have to get the big one out. And it's really handy.
How often do you use that dual burner opposed to the single?
It's more for just if we're cooking dinner. So just if, I've got a pot of rice going and I'm cooking a stir fry or something, it's more just a dinner time. Yeah, so
option. We like to eat the local cuisine because obviously that's part of the traveling here. So we'll cook when we're either away from a town, and so that may be two nights a week, perhaps 2 or 3 nights a week. And so yeah, we'll get the big cooker out usually only for those ones. We cook breakfast nearly every day, or eat breakfast every day. So or just boil the kettle. So the little ones out frequently during the days, nearly every day. But the big one, yeah, maybe only 2 to 3 times a week.
And what's a favorite recipe?
I think my go-to recipe is probably doing a curry. They're definitely not anything compared to actual Indian curries, but they're just so easy to put together, and I can usually make a fair bit of it so that we can have some for lunch the next day. Yeah. And Mark seems to like them, so...
That's good. Have you picked up any new recipes or ways of doing curry as you're in India?
Not yet. We've only briefly been in India before we came to Nepal, but I'm definitely looking to do a bit of a cooking class while we're here. Take home some knowledge. Yeah.
And how do you plan out your minimal food supplies for this trip, for those longer stretches between cities?
It was definitely a bit of trial and error to begin with, though we were eating a lot more meat as well in Australia because we had the freezer, and actually one thing that for places like Australia where you're going to really remote places, having the option to have a freezer and in addition to a fridge was really important because I could keep fish or meat for a longer period of time without having to go into a town or go to, having canned meats, which I had to do at one point and have tuna because that was never in my diet before. So just, I think having the freezer was great, but just writing down the days and then sort of working out your meals and then going from there. But trial and error was how I figured it out
to begin with. And then, so before going on a longer, trips through a section of the outback, we'd plan how many days we'd be there, how many meals, and just write essentially a meal plan for that period, and then go by accordingly. So we'd have the meats, and then we also carry a full store of non-perishables as a backup. So say worst case scenario, the fridge failed, we would then have food to last us for several days, which we still carry now. But it's about a meal plan. There's duration and making sure you're buying foods which is not taking up excessive space. We
found that making wraps were a great way because it wasn't just something that you'd cook once and then all that food would be gone. It was something that would last, 3 or 4 days out of just a couple of things.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, what do you use for the food that's non-perishable? Like in the U.S., we've got Mountain House, which is a freeze-dried food. What is it that you guys use?
Things more just like bolognese sauce and chickpeas or tuna, rice, stuff like that.
Yes, okay. And then we have the canned food as well. So the canned tunas, which Jolie's not very fond of. But basic canned food, which we've kind of chosen food based on its nutritional value. So obviously the tuna's giving us the protein, and other foods like that where we're still getting nutritional value from them, but they're not consuming a lot of space in the car, so we can store them without worrying for longer periods.
Okay. And any tips that you've got for purchasing fresh meats and vegetables from small towns and villages outside your home country of Australia?
Go to the markets, not the supermarkets, because there's so much fresh fruit there, and they have so many different varieties which they just don't have at home as well. So it's really interesting seeing all the different fruits and veg when they're raw. You're not just going to a restaurant and getting something new in your curry or whatever. So I think go to the markets, and it's so cheap, and you can sort of bargain with them a bit if you want as well. And it's a good way to meet the locals too.
This is part 2 with Mark and Jolie with The Way Overland. This week we dive deep into border crossings with some new tips you'll want to take note of.
So it is worth noting on this second half, as you may have noticed on the last, 2 minutes of the first half, Mark had to turn on his inverter so that their electronics would stay charged for our in-depth conversation. So I did my best in getting that hum noise out. There's a little bit there. So just as a note, it's not perfect, but they were in Kathmandu in the back of their vehicle.
It makes it real.
And crammed back there. We so appreciate you, Mark and Jolie, for taking all the extra effort to connect with us in Kathmandu. It was a great conversation. All right, Lisa, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get into part 2 with Jolie and Mark of The Way Overland.
It does take a lot of time to do the videos, which is also good because it slows us down, and instead of kind of rushing through the trip, we'll often stay in places longer to do the videos, and it also gives us a different kind of outlook on the places we're staying in. We've spoken a few times about if we weren't doing the video, we potentially wouldn't be as motivated to go and get more footage in those areas and see more of the areas. True. So that's been good. It's kind of been a motivation to look at things differently. I imagine the same would be with traveling with children.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, very good. So tell us about what your process was for planning your trip, along with any daily or weekly planning that you may or may not do.
So before we left, it was probably about 12 months before we actually left that we decided that it was the route that we're going to take. So the essential planning before we left was things like visa requirements, the seasons as well, so that we weren't just battling it the whole way in the wrong season, and figuring out how much we'd need for ocean crossings and just other things like that. So they were our essential items to research. And then second to that was the things that we wanted to see, which dictates the route that you're going to take, really. So as we're still planning as we go, more extensively, but just having that base before you leave is really important.
Okay, great. On border crossings, what tips do you have in preparing for them, and how long do you find they're normally taking?
Just research what the requirements are for each country. On this route, it's quite easy because a lot of the countries are carnet de passage accepting countries, so that's the document that it's kind of like our passport for the car. So most of the countries accept that, which sort of streamline the process, and other countries you just have to research what they need, and it's gone pretty smoothly so far. There's been one time in Thailand that we didn't have one form which we were supposed to have, and then when we were exiting they tried to fine us about 200 Australian dollars for not having it, but we just went to the next border and they said it's fine, don't worry about it. But yeah, just being prepared and doing research beforehand, and they usually take, I think the longest is probably maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour, but they're usually pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and along with the researching is having copies of your visas for the next border. So we've come to borders where they want to see photocopies of your pre-approved visas, and then photocopies of your passports and any other documentation which you may need to cross the border. Having photocopies of that has streamlined the process, because some of these places, they may not even have like a photocopying machine. So just being able to produce that and say that's yours to have is always good. It always helps to streamline it.
Okay. And those photocopies, when you give those out, they don't give those back to you, right?
No.
So it would be wise to carry several copies with you?
Yeah, before we usually get to the border, we'll make new photocopies in the town prior to arriving to have fresh photocopies for the next. And we always carry another one, just generally in the car of all our licenses, passports, credit cards, just all copies. Worst case scenario, something we need to use those. But we always carry photocopies of all our documentation, and then we carry another set when we're approaching a border to potentially hand those over if needed.
Okay. Any specific border crossings that stand out to you?
Cambodian one would probably be one. We Cambodian crossing from Thailand to Cambodia is renowned for being sometimes difficult and perhaps corrupt at times. But we experienced the complete opposite to that. We showed up and they were pretty much said, all right, that's fine, you're here, see you later. No documentation checks, no photocopies, no filling out anything. They just said, yeah, you're free to go, which obviously creates a bit of concern. It'd be great to just say, yeah, thanks, goodbye. But thinking about leaving the country, thinking about if we got pulled over or in an accident, having no documentation is obviously quite worrying. So we insisted that they take photos of the car, take photos of our documentation. We tried to request them to give us import documents, but they wouldn't do it. And we asked for their names, and they just said, just call the office when you leave if you got any problems. But yeah, that was probably the easiest and probably the most concerning that we've gone through so far. Thankfully, nothing happened in Cambodia, and when we exited, it was the same sort of approach. They said, no worries, see you later. So as far as documentation goes, we've kind of never went to Cambodia. But that's been the worst of it so far.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And so any challenges that you had with communication and language barriers, and how did you get through that?
Most of the time people will speak a little bit of English. Google Translate has been our friend, especially in countries like Thailand, Cambodia, and these sort of countries where their language, they have a completely different, it's a different alphabet, so I wouldn't even know where to start reading it. And if they don't speak English, it comes up on your phone in their language, so that's been a great app to have. And then, just try and learn the basics of the language as well, like hello, thank you, maybe the numbers as well.
The local people really appreciate you making the effort to learn the basics. And it also, if you're shopping in a market, that makes a huge difference to know those basics, because they will try and charge you, well, not always, but they will try and charge you, if they can, a Western price. But if you can show them that you know even the basics, you will get a different price. And that's been good. But where we usually travel, we don't really like going to the cities because it doesn't really justify why we're traveling like this. So we are usually in the rural areas and away from civilization, and what that obviously brings apart is the fact that people, although those countries, they may speak some form of English in the cities, the people in the country, they can't speak English at all. And not only that, but they can't even read their own language. So there is communication barriers there at times, but we usually just get by. As long as you come across to them as being friendly, smiling and pointing, you get a really good reaction to these people. And that's something which we could not recommend more, is having an open mind and conveying like a positive kind of persona to these village people, because you're driving into these villages with essentially a spaceship to them, and it's quite the initial reaction you get is if it's not friendly, they're going to obviously get a bit concerned that you're here to do something which might jeopardize their farms or something like that. So,
any specific safety planning you do, or tips you can provide our listeners on safety and security?
We have some safety things for like our laptop and stuff like that, so they'll be able to lock away. For our safety, we have some pepper spray, we just thought it was a better like non-violent approach if something was to happen. And Mark's also installed some pretty bright lights underneath the roof rack, so that in the night time, if we hear something outside the car, we can just turn the lights on and just sort of let people know that we are here, sort of thing. But we've been really lucky so far. We haven't ever really felt unsafe, so I think we're very lucky in that sense.
Yeah.
Have you had any trouble getting through the border crossings with the pepper spray?
At the border crossings, they're very relaxed with doing searches of the car. Or relaxed, I should say, non-existent searches. We've only had our car looked in once, and it was opened the back doors, and they just sort of looked in and had a look in the toolbox, and that was sort of the extent of the search. So no, we haven't had any problems.
Yeah, at all. They haven't looked. Apart from that incident that Jolie just mentioned coming into India, prior to that, the most that we've had was someone ask a customs official ask us, are we carrying any guns? Are we carrying any drugs? And if we feel like, how is our health? And that was just simple questions. We answered no, obviously, to the guns and drugs, and yes, we're feeling fine. He said, okay, see you later. So that's been the extent of our vehicle searches. So we could carry whatever we want in the car. Obviously, we don't for obvious reasons, but no, we haven't had any problems with carrying really anything in the car.
Do you work on the road?
Yeah, we've just sort of committed to making videos. It's a full-time job in itself.
We do, yeah. We get money from the videos on Patreon. We've got a few generous people who donate to the video production, which is great, because the videos we do, there is cost associated with making the videos, with like music subscriptions and data charges, and because the computers need a lot of power to process these, and we're often finding ourselves we have to go to cafes and the like to sit in these, so there is costs which are associated with that. So we do make some money off Patreon to cover those costs, but that's essentially the extent of our work at the moment, and we enjoy it, so that's good.
Okay, and how flexible do you stay with your planning? Are you doing that on a daily basis, hourly basis? How do you do that?
Yeah, generally very flexible. I mean, when we first left, or before we left, we planned to do the trip from Australia to London in 12 months, and we're now about 16 months in, and we're not even halfway. So
it's quite flexible.
Yes.
That is pretty flexible.
Yeah, so we have a rough idea as to where we're going, but we sort of just take it as it comes, and if we meet a local who recommends a place which we had never heard of to go to, we'll go and check it out, because otherwise, you might miss out on something that's amazing.
Yeah, we have obviously we need to plan around our visa requirements, and we try and, if we like the country, we'll try and stay there and maximise what we see in those countries. So we have an estimate of how long we're going to be in the country, and a rough idea of what we're going to see in those areas. So India, for example, we can't go. We want to go to the Stans after India, but because the Karakoram is closed from essentially now till the 1st of April, we know that we can't go up past there into the Stans until at least the end of March next year. So we know that we're going to be in India or this area until then. So that's for example, that's our next hurdle, and then we work through what can we do in that time, where can we go, things to look at, people to meet in that time. And then we just kind of plan accordingly, but it's not fixed in that time. So we're in Nepal now, and that's one of the things that we've done to kill some time, which is not a bad thing. We're going next week. We're starting a month-long hike through the Himalayas, which we're here. Why not? Then we'll drive down to Sri Lanka. But these are all loose things. The only real timeline we have, or deadline, is to be at the start of the Karakoram as soon as it opens next year.
Okay.
I've always wanted to learn guitar, so we bought a guitar and we bring that with us as well. So whenever I can, I sit down and and try and learn that. It's just an ongoing process. But yeah, it's something which I've meaning to do for many years, and obviously having this opportunity and the time now, it's trying to make the most of it. There's also the photography. I take a lot of photos which don't go on the internet for kind of myself, which maybe one day I'll publish, but yeah, the photography and even the videos to an extent is something which, yeah, it's become a new passion, and it's great having that time to do those sort of things for yourself, which you may neglect when working.
And what keeps the co-driver occupied on long drives?
Holding on.
Holding on. The traffic is so scary sometimes. So, yeah, there's a bar in front of the passenger seat which I can hold on to, and it has a nickname called the Jesus bar. So,
I love it.
So I hold on to that a lot. And then if it's a bit more relaxed drive, maybe I'll entertain Mark with some karaoke, which he loves.
Okay, we want to see that in the next year.
I don't think you do. I think it's terrible singing voice.
That would be entertaining nonetheless.
Yeah. And yeah, just looking at the world go by as we drive through.
You also do like planning for like where we're going, like potential places to stay, or pre-planning the routes for the next days, and the like.
Do you guys use iOverlander much?
We do actually, and where we're staying right now is one place which is on iOverlander. It especially in cities we use it more.
What's your favorite drink in the morning to get you going?
Strong coffee.
And what's a favorite beverage at night to wind down after a long day on the road?
Wine. A red wine if we can, but they're sort of few and far between these days.
No, they're wine and alcohol is very expensive in these countries, so it's a bit of a treat these days. But the local beer is cheap, so might have a beer every now and then after a long day.
If it's been a rough day.
Yeah, there you go. So what is your best advice to aspiring overlanders like us?
I guess from a planning perspective, you don't really need the biggest and the best of everything. As long as you're carrying like things like something which is smart and serves a good purpose, that's like should form the basis. If you've got space, you don't need to fill it just because it's there. Like, people have been surprised by when they look at our interior how minimal stuff we carry and how much spare space we have. And I guess for me, traveling overland before, I realized that you don't need everything. If you're going to use it once in maybe 6 months and it's not like a necessity for emergencies, probably don't need it. And clothes is probably the biggest one. I'd suggest pulling out what you think you need and then halving it, and then even maybe halving it again, because you just won't wear it. And so that's probably from the planning.
And then, also, just continuing on with the planning, like, make sure that you do planning, but don't be super strict with your schedule. Like, have an open mind to different experiences that someone might recommend for you to do, because they're some of the best experiences which we've had so far.
Yeah.
Just sort of go with the flow and respect the locals, and
I've mentioned before, have an open mind. Like, for where we're going, we go through different cultures, and they've been doing that for like hundreds of years, and that's just what they do. Although we may not agree with it, the worst thing you can do is put your Western mindset onto them. Like, that's what they do. So just be open to it and just accept that that's how they are. And we've noticed that talking to other overlanders that attitude really changes how you experience that place. And if you can approach it with an open mind and be positive and just accept that's the way it is, well, the people are more open and accepting of you being there. And we've had some great experiences relating to those sort of people.
Okay, great. So how can people learn more about you and what you're doing? What's the best way for them to get connected with you?
Probably by our YouTube channel. We do a lot of talking on it, so it's quite personal. So they can find us if they just type in the way Overland. We generally try and put a video up maybe once a week. So that's probably the best way.
And then there's obviously the socials as well, so the Instagram, Facebook, and then our website also, which is just thewayoverland.com.
Check out the YouTube videos they do. We certainly like them, and we think you will like them as well.
Thank you so much for your time. We are humbled that you've given us such an amazing look into your world, experiences, and knowledge. Safe travels and adventures to you, and we hope to catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for letting us on. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Cheers.
No worries. Bye.
With all the places that you've been, what are your current top 2 or 3 destinations, along with a little detail on what made them so special for you?
I think the Darjeeling region of northern India on the Nepalese border, that was definitely a high point, one of my favorite places. I think another area that we found was unbelievably friendly was Iran. We heard all sorts of scary stories about Iran before we went on our trip, and we're like, should we go to Iran? What's it going to be like? And when we got there, it was incredible. The people were among the friendliest we've met anywhere in the world. They would just flag you down on the road when they saw your license plate being from, North America, and just said, "Wow, we are so excited and happy that you came to visit our country, and we want to let you know." Yeah, and they just said, we want to tell the world that our country does not represent us as a people, and they would welcome us into their homes and feed us dinner and show us around and take us on trips. And so we spent a month in Iran, and it was really, really special.
That's awesome.
Thing I got, darling, want you to know. I wanna hold you in my arms, darling, dance real slow. You're the best thing I got, darling, want you to know. I wanna hold you in my arms, darling, dance real slow. Ooh, yeah, yeah,
It's always fun to hear about Overlanders' trips and stories or places that they really stood out for them. What are your current top 2 or 3 destinations that really stand out, along with a little detail on what made them so different?
Yeah, that's difficult. So I can tell you India is not part of it. That's what we've learned. India was not our country, but all Central Asia is incredible. The green mountains of Kyrgyzstan with the wild horses roaming around. In Tajikistan, the high desert on 4,000 meters plus. Pakistan's people are so friendly, especially in the north, and that in combination with the great mountain scenery and the wilderness, incredible. So that's it for Central Asia, but also countries like Greece and Turkey are usually known for us as typical tourist destination for Germans. But if you don't hit the coastline, just drive a little bit further inland. Incredible countries.
Shaking the street light.